When I picked up the phone to ask my son Lucas what time his wedding would be, my daughter-in-law Patricia looked me straight in the eyes and said with an icy smile, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. Special people. I, who for 3 years had paid their $1,500 monthly rent, who had bought every piece of furniture in their house, who filled their refrigerator when they didn't even have food to eat. I wasn't a special person. Stood there in the living room of my own house, holding the phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Watching my son avoid my gaze while Patricia adjusted herself on the sofa I had bought them. The pink dress I had chosen for their wedding hung useless in my closet, along with the new shoes and the illusion of being part of the most important day of my only son's life. I had spent $600 on that dress. Thinking about how beautiful I would look in Lucas's wedding, photos I would never appear in. For weeks, I had planned every detail. I had set aside extra money to give them $3,000 as a wedding gift. I had called my sister in Rio de Janeiro to share the good news. I had cleaned my house from top to bottom because I thought maybe they would come celebrate with me after the ceremony. All of this crumbled in 1 second with those 4 poisoned words, "Only special people." Lucas finally looked up and told me in a voice that sounded rehearsed, "Mom, it was something intimate, very small. Just the two of us and the witnesses." But I knew it was a lie. I saw the photos on social media. I saw Patricia's parents posing proudly next to the newlyweds. I saw her siblings toasting with champagne. I saw Patricia's white dress, which I had helped pay for with the $300 I gave her for personal expenses last month. I saw everything I wasn't invited to see. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, Patricia called me with a completely different voice. She was no longer the confident woman who had excluded me from the wedding. Now she sounded desperate, almost pleading. "Dulcie, the rent is late. The landlord is pressuring us and says if we don't pay this week, he's going to evict us. You forgot to make the transfer." Her voice trembled slightly, as if the world were collapsing on her. I was silent for a few seconds, remembering all the times I had rushed to the bank to make that transfer. All the times I had canceled my own plans to ensure they had a roof over their heads. All the times I had eaten beans and rice so I could give them money for their whims. And now, after excluding me from the most important moment of their lives, they had the audacity to call me as if nothing had happened. "Patricia," I said with a calmness that surprised me, "didn't I tell you that I only help special people?" The silence on the other end of the line was so deep I could hear my own heart beating. For the first time in years, it wasn't me who was trembling, it was her. "Dulcie, I don't understand," she stammered. "We've always been special to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies. All lies wrapped in that sweet voice she used only when she needed something. The same voice she had used to ask me for money for the wedding dress, for the honeymoon, for the rings I had helped finance, not knowing I would never see the ceremony where they would exchange them. For so many years, I lived with that constant feeling of walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to receive a crumb of affection from my own son. I was the perfect mother, the compliant mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested when they treated me as if I were invisible. But that phrase, "only special people," awakened something in me that had been dormant for a very long time. I mentally calculated how much money I had spent on them in those 3 years. Between rent, food, gifts, emergencies, and whims, more than $60,000. $60,000 that I took from my retirement, from my savings, from the money my late husband left so I could live peacefully in my final years. And for what? To be treated like a stranger on my own son's wedding day. That night, after hanging up the phone, I sat on my bed and cried. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of anger, of accumulated frustration, of years of humiliation swallowed in silence. I cried for all the times they made me feel that my love was a burden, that my presence was a hindrance, that my money was the only valuable thing I had to offer. I cried for the foolish mother I had been, for the woman who lost herself trying to be indispensable to those who considered her disposable. When I woke up the next morning, something had changed inside me. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was something deeper, colder. I got up from bed and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes as always, the same wrinkles that tell stories of years giving love without receiving it back. But there was something different in my gaze. A hardness I didn't recognize, a determination that had been buried under years of compliance. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, as I had every morning for the last 40 years. But this time I didn't think about calling Lucas to ask how he had slept. I didn't check my phone hoping for some message from him, apologizing for yesterday's humiliation. For the first time in a long time, my first concern of the day was myself. I sat at the table where so many times I had planned surprises for them, where I had counted bills for their expenses, where I had cried silently when they treated me with indifference. Now that table would witness something completely different. I took out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began to calculate. I wanted to see in exact numbers the size of my own stupidity. Monthly rent, $1,500 for 36 months, $54,000. Food and groceries, approximately $500, monthly another $18,000. Birthday gifts, Christmas, wedding anniversaries, at least $9,000. Patricia's medical emergencies, $2,400. The car loan they never repaid, $7,500. Repairing their apartment's air conditioning, $300. The living room furniture, $3,600. $102,200. That was the exact figure of my generosity. I had wasted $102,200 that I had taken from my husband's inheritance, from my retirement, from the savings I had kept penny by penny during decades of honest work. All that money thrown away to keep comfortable to adults who couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone rang and I saw Lucas's name on the screen. Normally, I would have run to answer with my heart racing, hoping he would finally ask for forgiveness, that he would explain that everything had been a misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Finally, it stopped and I continued drinking my coffee as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Patricia. I let her ring too. Then came a text message from Lucas. "Mom, answer the phone. We need to talk to you urgently." I deleted the message without responding. At 2 p.m., I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't done this in months without a specific purpose, without a task related to them. It was always the bank to make transfers, the supermarket to buy something they needed, the pharmacy for Patricia's medications. Today, I walked just because I wanted to. I passed by the park where I used to take Lucas when he was a child. I remembered that sweet boy who hugged me tight and told me I was the best mother in the world. At what point did he become this man who treated me like an ATM with feelings? When did I start confusing love with money? When did I start believing I had to buy my own son's affection? At the bank, where so many times I had made automatic transfers, I stopped in front of the door. The manager, Mr. Carlos Abreu, saw me through the glass and waved. I'd known him for years. He had processed each of my transfers to Lucas and Patricia. He had watched my account empty month after month to fill theirs. I went in and went straight to his office. "Mr. Carlos," I said, "I need to cancel all the automatic transfers I have programmed." He looked at me, surprised. For 3 years, those transfers had been as regular as the sunrise. "Are you sure, Mrs. Dulcie, did something happen?" His concern was genuine. More genuine than any interest Lucas had shown in me in recent months. "What happened is that I finally opened my eyes." I replied, "I want to cancel everything, and I also want information about how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money." While Carlos processed the cancellations, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lucas, Patricia. Lucas, again. It was as if they had developed a radar to detect when their income source was in danger. I turned off the phone completely. "Mrs. Dulcie," said Carlos, as he handed me the papers. "Excuse me for intruding, but in all these years I've seen you be very generous with your family. I hope they're not pressuring you to make these changes." His words touched me deeply. This man, who barely knew me beyond banking transactions, showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own son. "They're not pressuring me, Mr. Carlos. On the contrary, I've finally stopped pressuring myself." When I left the bank, I felt strangely light, as if I had left an enormous weight in that office. For the first time in years, my money was completely mine. I had no financial commitments to people who saw me as a resource instead of a human being. I walked home thinking about all the things I had stopped doing to please Lucas and Patricia, the trips I didn't take to save money for them, the friends I stopped seeing because I was always available for their emergencies, the hobbies I abandoned because every dollar I spent on myself was one less dollar for their needs. When I arrived home, I found 3 cars parked in front of my door: Lucas's, Patricia's, and one I didn't recognize. There was movement inside my house through the windows. My blood ran cold. They had keys. I had given them keys because I trusted them, because I thought someday they would take care of me as I had taken care of them. I took a deep breath before opening the door. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. I opened the door to my house and was faced with a scene I will never forget. Lucas was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands. Patricia was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, and there was an older man I didn't know reviewing papers on my dining table. My papers, my personal documents. What's happening here?" I asked in a voice that sounded steady despite everything. All 3 looked at me as if I were an intruder in my own house. Patricia was the first to speak, and her voice had that desperate urgency I had already heard on the phone. "Dulcie, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Mr. Mendez is from the law firm where we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question came out of my mouth with a calmness that surprised me. "What situation? I'm perfectly fine." Lucas finally lifted his head and looked at me with those eyes that once belonged to an innocent child and now only reflected financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank and they told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. Carlos explained that you also blocked our access to your accounts. We don't understand why you did this." Mendez, a man about 50 years old in a gray suit with a smile that didn't inspire confidence, approached me with his hand extended. "Mrs. Dulcie, I'm Fernando Mendez, a lawyer specializing in family law. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being and asked me to evaluate the situation." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I went straight to my dining table and collected all my documents he had been reviewing without my permission. "These are my private papers. You have no right to review them without my authorization." "Mom," Lucas intervened with that condescending voice he had perfected in recent years, "we're worried about you. Your behavior has been very strange lately. First, you exclude us financially without explanation. Then you don't answer our calls. We think maybe you need professional help." Patricia approached and tried to take my hand with that false tenderness she reserved for when she needed something. "Dulcie, dear, we know you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe loneliness is affecting you more than you think. It's normal at your age to have episodes of confusion." The word confusion resonated in my head like an alarm bell. Now I understood why they had brought the lawyer. It wasn't to help MIT, was to declare me mentally incapable and take control of my finances. The same woman who had told me they only invited special people to their wedding now treated me as if I were a senile old woman. "I'm not confused," I said with a firmness that made everyone fall silent. "I'm more lucid than I've been in years, and you're going to leave my house right now." Mr. Mendez intervened with that professional voice lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable. Mrs. Dulcie, I understand you feel overwhelmed, but your children have the legal right to intervene if they consider your capacity to make financial decisions is compromised. They have documented several concerning behaviors. Concerning behaviors. The laugh that came from my throat was harsh, almost cruel. Like deciding that my money is mine. Like choosing not to finance the lives of two adults who treat me like garbage anymore. Patricia jumped as if I had slapped her. We never treated you badly. You're part of our family. Everything you have will be ours someday anyway. We're just advancing the process. There was the naked truth. Everything I had would be theirs someday. In their minds, I was already dead, and they were just collecting the inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 70 years ahead of me or 70 days. To them, I was just a bank account with legs that had become problematic. Out, I said, pointing to the door. All three of you out of my house. Lucas stood up with that expression of a bratty child he had when he couldn't get what he wanted. Mom, we can't leave like this. We have responsibilities. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you guaranteed. Can't just cut us off from one day to the next, can't I? My voice rose in tone for the first time in that entire conversation. Who said I can't? For 36 months, I paid rent that isn't even in my name. I filled a refrigerator in a house where I'm not welcome. I financed a life that clearly doesn't include space for me. Mr. Mendez took a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my table. Mrs. Dulcie, we prepared some documents that could facilitate this transition. A power of attorney that would allow Lucas and Patricia to manage your finances more efficiently. It would be temporary, just until you feel better. I took the folder and threw it directly in the trash without even opening it. The only transition that's going to happen here is you three transitioning to the exit door. Patricia began to cry. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration, of contained anger. You can't do this to us, Dulcie. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things, made financial commitments, because we knew we could count on you. Commitments based on my money, I responded. Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company, just on my money. And now that I've decided my money has a better use in my own life, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs legal supervision. Lucas tried to approach me, but I stepped back. He was no longer the boy who used to run into my arms when he had nightmares. He was a 35-year-old man who saw his mother as an obstacle between him and a comfortable life financed by others. Mom, we made mistakes, he said with a voice that tried to sound repentant. The wedding was a misunderstanding. Patricia was nervous. I was under pressure. We can resolve this if you just go back to being reasonable. Reasonable. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Being reasonable meant continuing to pay for their lives while they treated me like a stranger. It meant pretending it didn't hurt to have been excluded from the most important day of my only son's life. Mr. Mendez packed his papers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to having proposals rejected. Mrs. Dulcie, this doesn't end here. Your family has legal options. If you really are making irrational decisions due to mental health problems, a judge can determine that you need supervision. His words were like a physical blow. I realized this wasn't just a family manipulation. Visitat was a real legal threat. They wanted to have me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. Mr. Mendez, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, I suggest you investigate thoroughly before threatening a 16-year-old woman who has managed her finances impeccably for 40 years, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who maintained a home, who worked until she retired honorably, and who until last week financially supported two completely capable adults. Patricia stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally showed her true face. This isn't going to stay like this, Dulcie. We also have rights and lawyers. Perfect, I replied. Hire all the lawyers you want with your money, of course, because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums. The three of them headed for the door with the wounded dignity of those who aren't used to hearing no. Before leaving, Lucas turned to me one last time. "Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone with no one to take care of you when you really need it." "Lucas," I said with deep sadness, but also with crystal clarity, "I'm already alone. The difference is that now it's by my own choice, not due to your neglect." When the door closed behind them, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't from sadness or regret. It was from the adrenaline of having regained control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, planning my next moves like a general preparing for battle. If Lucas and Patricia wanted to fight, I would give them a war, but it would be a war I would fight with intelligence, not emotions. At 6 a.m., I was already dressed and ready to go out. My first stop was the office of lawyer John Fonseca, a man I had met years ago when I made my husband's will. Unlike Mr. Mendez that Lucas and Patricia had brought, John had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of the elderly. "Mrs. Dulcie," he told me when I explained the situation, "what your children tried yesterday is more common than you think. It's called financial abuse against the elderly, and it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your house without permission and searched your private documents also constitutes a violation." His words both reassured and alarmed me. They reassured me because they confirmed I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was really abusive. They alarmed me because I realized the situation was more serious than I had thought. "We need to document everything," John continued. "Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We'll also change your will to protect your assets from any future manipulation attempts." We spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. John whistled when he saw the total amount, $102,200 in 3 years. "Mrs. Dulcie, with this money you could have lived comfortably, traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you completely financed the lives of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding." When I left John's office, I had a complete plan. First, I would change all the locks on my house. Second, I would install a security system with cameras to protect myself from future surprise visits. Third, I would open a new bank account at a different bank where they had no contacts. And fourth, I would start living the life I had postponed for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, Mr. Paul, had known me for years because I always went to buy things to fix Lucas and Patricia's apartment. This time was different. "Mrs. Dulcie, what brings you here today? Another emergency at your son's house?" He asked with that familiarity of someone who had been a silent witness to my wasted generosity. "No, Mr. Paul. This time, it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want them to be the best quality you have." He looked at me, surprised, but didn't ask questions. While I was selecting the locks, his son Gabriel arrived, who worked installing security systems. It was Providence in action. "Gabriel," I said, "I also need to install security cameras. The complete system, price is no problem." While they prepared everything for installation the next day, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Patricia calling from someone else's phone because I had blocked her number after yesterday's confrontation. "Dulcie, it's Patricia. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults." "Talk," I said dryly. "Look, I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Lucas and I talked and we want to compensate you. What do you think about organizing a special dinner to celebrate our marriage with you? We can do it at your house, cook together like before." The manipulation in her words was so obvious it almost made me want to laugh. "Patricia, how much do you owe in rent exactly?" The silence on the other end confirmed that I had hit the mark. Well, it's 2 months, $3,000 total, but it's not just because of that I'm calling Dulcie. We really miss you in our lives. Do you miss me or do you miss my money?" I asked directly. Both, she replied with honesty that surprised me. Dulcie, I won't lie. Yes, we need your financial help, but we also love you. You're important to us. If I'm so important, I said, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to receive a call that isn't asking for money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was? Another silence. We both knew the answer. Never. Patricia, I'm going to explain something to you just once. For 3 years, you treated me like an ATM with feelings. You used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and finally insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is gone, you suddenly discover that you love me. Dulcie, please, I interrupted her. There's no please that works. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't special enough to be at your wedding. Now I'm making mine. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions during my Liberation Day. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon, where I hadn't been for more than a year. I always canceled my appointments because Lucas or Patricia needed something urgent, or because the money I had saved for myself ended up being their emergency. Mrs. Dulcie, shouted Cynthia, my favorite hairdresser. What a surprise! Thought you had forgotten about us. I didn't forget, Cynthia. I just forgot that I also deserve to be taken care of. I got the complete treatment: cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without feeling guilty. While Cynthia worked on my hair, she told me about her life, her children, her dreams. It was refreshing to have a conversation that didn't revolve around Lucas and Patricia's needs. You look beautiful, Mrs. Dulce, she told me when she finished. But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen? Yes, Cynthia. I finally learned to say no. When I arrived home that afternoon, there was a car parked in front of my door that I didn't recognize. My heart accelerated for a moment, thinking that maybe Lucas and Patricia had returned with reinforcements. But when I approached, I saw it was an older woman sitting on my front steps. Mrs. Dulcie, she asked when I got out of the car. Kiss, that's me. How can I help you? I'm Renata Viana. I live in the house next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we never had the opportunity to talk. Yesterday, I heard very loud voices in your house, and I was worried. Is everything okay? Her genuine concern touched me deeply. Here was a stranger showing more interest in my well-being than my own son. Come in, Mrs. Renata. I'll make coffee and tell you a story you won't believe. While I prepared coffee, I told her the whole situation. Renata listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and when I finished my account, her eyes were full of tears. Mrs. Dulcie, she told me, you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my daughter 5 years ago. I also thought it was my obligation to finance her adult life. I also believed that if I didn't give them money, they wouldn't love me. What happened? I cut off their money when I realized they only called when they needed something. At first it was terrible. They threatened me, emotionally blackmailed me, tried to make me feel guilty. But after 6 months, my daughter called to truly apologize. Now we have a real relationship based on love, not money. Her words gave me hope and confirmed that I had made the right decision. Do you think Lucas and Patricia will understand someday? Maybe yes, maybe no, she replied honestly. But that's no longer your responsibility, Mrs. Dulce. Your responsibility now is to live your own life. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without worrying if Lucas and Patricia had money for rent, for food, for their whims. I went to sleep thinking about myself, my plans, my future, and I slept better than I had in years. The next day, Gabriel and Mr. Paul arrived at 8 a.m. to change the locks and install the security system. While they worked, my phone wouldn't stop ringing from unknown numbers. Patricia kept trying to contact me from different phones. But I had developed a new skill, completely ignoring calls that didn't suit me. Mrs. Dulce, said Gabriel while installing the cameras, this system will give you complete peace of mind. You can see who arrives at your house through your phone, even when you're not here. And if someone enters without permission, an alert is automatically sent to the police. The irony didn't escape me. I was installing a security system to protect myself from my own son, but it no longer hurt like before. It was simply a practical measure to maintain my new peace. While they worked, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: call my sister Bianca in Rio de Janeiro. We had lost touch because every time we talked, I ended up telling her about Lucas and Patricia's achievements, about how much money I had spent on them, about the pride I had in being able to help them. Now I realized our conversations had become financial reports disguised as family news. Dulcie, Bianca answered, surprised. "Sister, how are you? It's been months since we talked." "I'm fine, Bianca, better than fine. Actually, I'm calling to tell you that I finally regained my sanity." I told her the whole story from the beginning. The secret wedding, the humiliation, the visit with the lawyer, my decision to cut off funding. Bianca listened in silence, and when I finished, her response surprised me. "Dulcie, sister, it was about time." Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear you brag about how much money you had given them, as if love were measured in dollars. I wanted to tell you something, but I didn't know how. What did you want to tell me? That Lucas never spoke about you with affection when I heard him at family gatherings. It was always "my mother helped me with this," or "my mother bought me that." But never "I miss my mother," or "I love my mother very much." It was as if you were a service, not a person. Her words hurt me, but it was a necessary pain, like when a doctor cleans an infected wound. It hurts, but it's part of the healing. "Do you know what else caught my attention?" Bianca continued. "Patricia always talked about you in the future tense. When Dulcie is no longer here, we'll be able to renovate her house. Or when we inherit, we'll invest in the business." As if they were waiting for you to die to start really living. This revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. Not only did they see me as an ATM, but as a temporary obstacle between them and money. While I was bending over backwards to make them happy, they were planning the future without me. After hanging up with Bianca, I sat in my kitchen processing all that information. 45 years of marriage to a man who truly loved me. 35 years raising a son alone after being widowed. And 3 years financing 2 adults who saw me as a millionaire nuisance. The doorbell rang, and I saw on the new cameras that it was Renata with a cup in her hands. I opened the door, and she offered me fresh coffee. "I thought you might need company after everything you told me yesterday," she said with that genuine smile I had already begun to appreciate. We sat in my living room, and Renata told me more details of her own experience. "My daughter told me exactly the same things Patricia tells you. You're like a second mother to me. We're special to you. Someday everything will be ours anyway." They're rehearsed phrases, Mrs. Dulcie. They learn them from the emotional manipulation manual. "Do you think such a manual exists?" I asked half-jokingly. "Not officially, but it seems they all read from the same book. Chapter 1 is Make Her Feel Indispensable. Chapter 2 is Create Constant Financial Emergencies. Chapter 3 is If She Resists, Question Her Mental Health." We laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. It was funny and tragic at the same time to recognize such predictable patterns in our own children's behavior. "Renata, did you ever feel guilty about cutting off the money?" "Every day, for the first 3 months," she replied honestly. But then I started to see the results. My daughter had to get a second job. Her husband stopped playing golf every weekend and started looking for extra work. They learned to live within their means. And, more importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years: visit my husband's grave. I always found excuses not to go because Lucas or Patricia needed something, or because the taxi money was better invested in some emergency of theirs. The cemetery was quiet and beautiful. Roberto's grave looked a little neglected because it had been months since I had cleaned it. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and spoke to him as if he were alive. "Roberto, my love, I think I got lost for a while. After you left, I put all my energy into Lucas. I wanted to be the best mother in the world to somehow compensate for him growing up without a father. But I think in the process, I forgot to be myself. Our son became someone I don't recognize. Or maybe he always was like this, and I didn't want to see it. His wife, well, you already know how she is. The money you left for me to live peacefully, I spent to maintain them. But no more love, I've already learned. I cleaned his grave, changed the wilted flowers for new ones, and stayed there for another hour, just enjoying the peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry to get home to solve some crisis of Lucas and Patricia's. When I returned home, there were 3 cars parked in front of my door again. My heart accelerated, but this time I was prepared. The cameras showed me it was Lucas, Patricia, and 2 other people I didn't recognize. They all seemed agitated, talking among themselves and pointing at my house. I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I called John, my lawyer. John, they're at my house again. It's time they brought more people. What should I do? Don't get out of the car, Mrs. Dulcie. I'm coming there immediately and I'm calling the police. After our conversation yesterday, I requested a temporary restraining order. They can't be on your property. 15 minutes later, John and 2 police cars arrived. I watched as the officers spoke with Lucas and Patricia, how my son gesticulated furiously, how Patricia cried again. But this time, her tears didn't affect me. One of the officers approached my car. Ma'am, you can get out safely. Your visitors are leaving right now. When I got out of the car, Lucas shouted from the street, Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. Key can't call the police on your own son. Lucas, I replied with a calmness that surprised me. Family doesn't threaten with mental incapacity lawsuits. Family doesn't enter other people's houses without permission. Family doesn't treat their mothers like ATMs. Patricia shouted from across the street. You're going to pay us everything you owe us. We have bills, you've guaranteed. You can't abandon us like this. John intervened. Mrs. Patricia, any future communication must be through my office, and I suggest you consult a lawyer before making collection threats, because my client has complete documentation of all payments she made voluntarily during 3 years. I watched them drive away in their cars, defeated but not surrendered. I knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in this situation, I felt confident. I had professional help. I had emotional support from Renata. And, most importantly, I had mental clarity about what was right and what was wrong. That night, Renata invited me to dinner at her house. I met her daughter, who had come to visit her, and I could see with my own eyes what a healthy family relationship looked like. They spoke with respect, genuinely asked about each other's lives, laughed together. The daughter didn't ask for money, not once during the entire evening. This is what I wanted. The words slipped from my lips before I could stop them. Renata looked at me with eyes full of warmth, her hand lightly resting on mine. And maybe one day you will have it, she said softly. But for now, Dulcie, what you've gained is even more important. You've gained yourself back. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about her words. For years, I had begged silently for scraps of love, mistaking obligation and manipulation for affection. I had traded my dignity for the illusion of belonging. But now, for the first time, I could feel the space around me, my home, my silence, my choices, and it felt like oxygen. The following days passed quietly, though not without unease. The cameras I had installed showed Lucas and Patricia's car driving slowly past my house more than once. Sometimes they parked for a few minutes, as if waiting for me to emerge. Other times Patricia would step out, glance at my windows, and then get back in the car. I documented every visit, just as John advised. Still, every time I saw their silhouettes on the screen, I felt my stomach twist. Not with fear, but with something sharper. A grief mixed with disbelief. How had the boy who once clung to my skirts, afraid of the dark, turned into a man trying to declare his own mother incompetent? One morning, the doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw a young woman in a pressed blazer holding a clipboard. She smiled too professionally, too tightly. My instincts prickled. I opened the door only a crack. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Clara Roca. I'm with the Department of Elder Services. We received a report that you may be at risk and need a wellness check." I felt the air rush from my lungs. So this was their next move. "May I see your identification?" I asked, steadying my voice. She showed me a badge that looked official enough. "Ma'am," she continued, "this won't take long. I just need to ask you a few questions. There are reports of sudden financial changes, isolation from family, and possible paranoia. Installing unnecessary security systems, refusing medical or legal help from your loved ones. These are all concerning signs." I almost laughed a sharp, bitter laugh. It was Patricia's hand all over this report. She knew exactly which words to use to make me sound unstable. But I had learned my lesson, Miss Roca. Before I say anything, I want my lawyer present. Her smile faltered. "This isn't an interrogation, ma'am. You have nothing to hide." That phrase burned through me like acid. I had heard it before, used by abusers to justify prying and control. If you have nothing to hide, why resist? I cut her off. "Either you wait for my lawyer, or you come back another day." I called John immediately. Within 20 minutes, he arrived, his presence filling the room with calm authority. "Miss Roca," he said, after reviewing her badge, "unless you have a court order, this visit is harassment. My client is fully represented. If you proceed without me present, you're in violation of her rights." Clara shifted uncomfortably. "We just received reports from her family. We're obligated to investigate." "Family?" John's voice was firm. "The same family that tried to coerce her into signing a power of attorney. The same family that entered her home without consent. The same family currently under a temporary restraining order." He pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. "Here we have documentation of over $100,000 of financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and coercion. If anyone needs investigating, it's them." The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she read through the papers. When she finally looked at me, her expression had softened. "Mrs. Dulcie," she said, "may I ask you directly? Why did you cut off your financial support so abruptly?" I straightened my shoulders. "Because I realized I wasn't a mother to them. I was a bank account with legs. I was financing their lives while mine withered. And I won't do it anymore." She nodded slowly. "Do you manage your own finances?" "Every cent," I replied firmly. "Would you like to see my records? My bills are paid. My taxes are filed. I live independently. I cook. I clean. I have a social life. The only instability in my life is the people who can't accept that I stopped funding them." John added, "And she recently completed a medical evaluation. Perfectly healthy. Cognitively sharp." Clara sighed, closing her folder. "Based on what I've seen here, I don't find grounds for intervention. I'll close the case." After she left, John stayed for coffee. I stared at my hands, still trembling slightly. "John," I whispered, "how far will they go?" He met my eyes. "As far as they think they can, they're desperate. But remember, desperation leads to mistakes, and we'll be ready." That night, Renata knocked on my door, holding a bottle of wine. "I heard voices earlier," she said knowingly. "Was that another attack?" I laughed bitterly. This time, it was the state. We poured the wine, and as we clinked glasses, she smiled. "Then tonight, we celebrate. Every time you resist, Dulce, you become stronger." Her words warmed me, but when I lay down in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, asking silently, how much more strength will I need? Days turned into weeks. Lucas and Patricia didn't stop. Sometimes they parked outside. Sometimes they sent letters through lawyers. Sometimes they called from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. But then came the news I dreaded most. John arrived one Thursday morning, his face grave. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, his hands folded tightly. "Dulcie, they've filed a petition for guardianship. They're asking the court to declare you incompetent and appoint Lucas as your legal guardian." For a moment, the room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. That means, John said gently, if they succeed, Lucas would gain full control of your finances, your accounts, your house, everything. It felt like being buried alive. "John, how can they even think after everything I've done?" My voice broke. I covered my face with my hands. He leaned forward. "Listen to me. We're going to fight this. We have medical evidence, financial records, witnesses who can attest to your clarity. But you need to be prepared. They will lie. They will twist. They'll paint you as unstable." I lowered my hands, forcing my breath to steady, then let them try. "I won't hand them my dignity as easily as I handed them my money." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I underwent a thorough psychological evaluation with a respected psychiatrist. Dr. Costa. For 2 hours, she tested my memory, reasoning, problem-solving, and judgment. At the end, she smiled kindly. "Mrs. Dulcie, your cognitive function is not only intact, it's excellent for your age. You're as sharp as anyone I've tested." Her report became part of John's evidence. So did statements from Renata, from Cynthia at the salon, from Mr. Carlos at the bank, even from the locksmith and Gabriel who had installed my security system. Piece by piece, we built a fortress of proof. Still, at night, I couldn't help but cry. Not because I feared losing the case, but because I grieved the son I had lost long before this battle began. Lucas wasn't fighting for my well-being. He was fighting for my bank account. That realization cut deeper than any lawyer's threat. The court date approached. I bought myself a simple black suit, dignified, sober, wanted to walk into that courtroom not as a victim, as a woman who had lived 70 years with dignity, who refused to be erased by greed. The morning of the hearing, I looked in the mirror and whispered to my reflection, "They think they're burying me, but I am planting myself." I arrived at the courthouse before the sun had lifted itself fully over the city. The morning was pale and quiet, like the world was holding its breath. John walked beside me, briefcase in hand, steady as a lighthouse. The building doors parted with a low hydraulic sigh, and the cold air inside smelled like paper and polished stone. I felt every year of my age and, strangely, every ounce of my strength. We sat in the corridor outside the courtroom, and I watched people pass. A young couple whispering furiously. A man in a cheap suit with worry in his eyes. An elderly woman walking with her daughter. The daughter's hand a careful anchor at her elbow. For a second, I recognized myself in that woman someone loved, protected, gently guided. The image passed through me like a wave. Then Lucas appeared. He was wearing a new navy suit and a tie the color of old wine. He looked handsome. My boy always looked handsome in suits, but his face had a tightness to it, a calculation in his eyes. Patricia came a step behind, in black again, like a widow at a funeral. Maybe she was mourning the version of me that had been theirs to control, or maybe she was mourning the loss of easy money. Her eyes flicked over me, assessing. I met her gaze without blinking. We entered the courtroom. The judge, a gray-haired man with thoughtful eyes, Castro, as John had said, took his seat without drama.
"Are you?"
The bailiff called the session to order, and the hum of whispers sank into quiet. I folded my hands in my lap. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, steady as a drum. Their attorney spoke first. He was smooth, the kind of man who could pour sand into sugar bowls and make you say, "Thank you, Your Honor," he began, solemn and warm. "This is a difficult case. No one wants to be here. My clients love Mrs. Dulcie. They love her dearly. But in recent months, they've watched her change. They've watched her become isolated, paranoid, financially erratic. Their only goal is to protect her from harm." Every word had been chosen to sound like concern and taste like poison. He called Patricia first. She took the stand with the teary poise of a soap actress. Dulcie has always been like a second mother to me, she said, voice trembling at the edges. But she's not the same. She stopped answering our calls. She refused to come to family events. She installed cameras around her house, even though she lives in a safe neighborhood. She keeps talking about people taking advantage of her. I think she's depressed. I'm worried. John rose for the cross-examination. His voice was calm and dry, like he'd spent a lifetime pouring cold water on hot nonsense. Mrs. Patricia, when was the last time you called my client without asking for money? She blinked. We talk about many things. A date would help. I don't remember dates. Is it true that you and your husband were married without inviting her? It was a very small ceremony. Is it true you told her you invited only special people? That was taken out of context. What is the correct context for telling your mother-in-law she isn't special? Silence stretched. Patricia swallowed. I was nervous, she said finally, eyes shining with a fresh layer of tears. We were under a lot of pressure. Pressure, John repeated quietly. From the landlord, creditors, car payments. The kind of pressure relieved by my client's bank account. Her mouth tightened. We thought she wanted to be part of our lives. Only when her money was part of it, correct? The judge cleared his throat. John sat down. Patricia stepped off the stand with a careful, wounded dignity. And for a fleeting second, I felt the old instinct to comfort, to rescue, to mend. I gripped my own hands until the feeling passed. Lucas took the stand next. Seeing him there, hand raised, swearing to tell the truth, made something in me break and rearrange itself. I remembered the weight of him as a newborn, the smell of his hair after a bath, the way he'd fall asleep with his hand curled around my finger as if it were a lifeline. He was the lifeline then. He was pulling. My mother has always been generous, he began. I'll never deny that. But lately, it's like she's not herself. She cut us off without warning. She accuses us of using her. She refuses to see doctors. She pushes everyone away. John rose. Mr. Lucas, how much money has your mother given you in the past 3 years? I don't know the exact figure. Would $100,000 sound approximately correct? He hesitated. Maybe. How many times did you visit your mother in the past year without asking for help of any kind? Silence. Is it true you entered her home without permission and reviewed her private documents with an attorney present? We were concerned. We thought she was making dangerous choices. Dangerous to whom? Lucas's eyes flicked toward Patricia. To herself, he said. Or to your lifestyle. The judge raised a hand. Move along, counselor. The neighbor, Mr. Oliver, testified next. He sat stiff and certain, the righteous sentinel of his own lawn. She's different, he said, pointing at me with his chin. Cameras everywhere. Always people coming and going. She yelled in the street at her own family. It's disturbing. John's voice stayed gentle. Sir, did you ever speak to my client directly about any of this? No? So your testimony is based on what you saw from your window, through her private property in the midst of a family conflict that you don't fully understand. I know what I saw. Of course. And did you also see the police confirm a restraining order? Mr. Oliveira's lips thinned. She brought the police into a family matter that says everything it does, John murmured. It's just not what you think. They called the psychiatrist Lucas had hired Dr. Silvera. He spoke with the practiced neutrality of someone very used to being paid. I was asked to conduct an evaluation, he said. Mrs. Dulcie refused. Did you have a court order, doctor? John asked. No. So she exercised a legal right, and you are offering that refusal as evidence of illness. I would say it raises concern. And if a person refuses to let a stranger enter their home, does that also raise concern? That is not the question at hand. Not yours, perhaps. Then it was our turn. Dr. Costa testified that I was cognitively healthy, above average for my age, with excellent judgment. Mr. Carlos from the bank spoke about my long history of responsible financial decisions and confirmed that canceling the transfers was. Eh? In his words, rational, prudent, and overdue. Gabriel and his father confirmed the locks, the cameras, the timeline of installations after the intrusions. Cynthia from the salon testified about our conversations, about me rediscovering small joys, not sinking into paranoia, but rising into self-care. Renata spoke last among the witnesses, her voice steady and warm, and told the court the simple truth that I was not alone, not confused, not manipulated, that I was finally living. And then it was my turn. When I stood, my knees wobbled. The bailiff adjusted the microphone downward, and I smiled at him, grateful for the small kindness. I could feel Patricia's gaze on me, sharp as a needle. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the table. "Mrs. Dulcie," John said softly, "why did you stop supporting your son and his wife financially?" "Because I was dying," I said. The word surprised even me. Not the kind of dying anyone writes on charts. The kind that happens one small surrender at a time. I gave up trips I wanted to take. I stopped seeing friends because there was always a crisis. I ignored my health and my home and my joy. My life was an ATM slip. I wasn't a person to them. I was a service. And why now? Because I was told I wasn't a special person. I let the words sit in the room, heavy and simple. I had been financing their life for years. And I was told I wasn't special enough for their wedding. I'm 70 years old, Your Honor. I have outlived poverty, widowhood, and loneliness. But I won't outlive my own dignity. I won't bury it for people who don't see me. John nodded, letting the silence work for me instead of against me. Did you consult your doctor, your finances? Yes, I'm medically sound. My bills are paid, my finances are in order. The only thing that was out of order, I turned my head toward Lucas, was the expectation that my love would be measured in dollars. My love is not for sale. Their attorney stood for the cross. He tilted his head, sympathetic. Mrs. Dulcie, do you often feel people are watching you, following you? I feel people are watching me when they park outside my home every day in a car I recognize, I said, and a few people in the courtroom coughed to hide a laugh. Do you distrust your family? I distrust people who enter my house without permission, try to pressure me into signing legal papers I don't understand, and threaten to take my autonomy away. Family doesn't threaten you with guardianship to access your bank account. He shifted tactics. Mrs. Dulcie, you understand guardianship is for your protection. I understand guardianship is a legal tool that can be used for protection or for theft, depending on who's holding it. He tried to rattle me. You've become close with a neighbor recently, correct? She's influenced you against your family. Renata made me soup, I said. She listened to me. She never asked for money. If that's influence, I recommend it. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the room. The judge's mouth almost twitched into a smile. The attorney sighed. No further questions. When I stepped down, my legs felt steadier than when I'd stood up. I returned to my seat, and John squeezed my hand a brief, human gesture that grounded me. We broke for lunch. I sat on a bench outside and ate the sandwich I'd packed that morning. It tasted like cardboard, but it kept me from shaking. Across the courtyard, Lucas smoked a cigarette, something he never used to do. Patricia talked rapidly to their attorney, her hands slicing the air. For a moment, the smallest, meanest part of me whispered, "They're afraid." I didn't want to feed that part. I set my sandwich down and closed my eyes. I remembered bathing Lucas in the kitchen sink when we were too poor for anything else. Remembered his baby laugh, his tiny hands splashing like fish. I remembered the first school play where he'd forgotten his lines and looked out into the crowd and found me. And I smiled so big that he smiled back and the fear crumbled off him. I remembered the night he was 13 and came home crying because a boy said his shoes looked cheap. And how I swore to myself that my child would never feel small because of money again. How I started taking extra shifts. How I learned that money could not only buy shoes, It could buy silence and pretend gratitude and eventually contempt. I breathed out slow. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the ghost of that boy. "I taught you the wrong lesson." When court resumed, both sides gave closing arguments. Their attorney spoke like a lullaby, soothing, concerned, full of the word protect. John spoke like a mirror, reflecting, unadorned. "No one here denies that Mrs. Dulcie was generous," he said. "No one denies she changed her locks, installed cameras, and canceled transfers. The question is why? If a woman is exploited for years and then stops being exploited, is that instability? Or is that recovery? Guardianship isn't a consolation prize for disappointed heirs. It's a last resort for those who truly cannot care for themselves. Mrs. Dulcie can. She has. She will." Judge Castro leaned back, fingers steepled, and looked at me for a long time. "I'm going to take a brief recess and return with my ruling," he said. The minutes stretched like hours. I felt the courtroom close around us, a pressure chamber of hope and fear. Renata sat behind me. I could sense her presence like a warm shawl. John placed his palm on the table, fingers relaxed. Patricia whispered into Lucas's ear. He nodded, jaw clenched. The judge returned. Everyone rose, everyone sat. He cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the testimony carefully," he began. "Guardianship is an extreme intervention. It removes a person's legal right to make their own decisions. It is intended to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In this case, I see no evidence that Mrs. Dulcie lacks capacity. To the contrary, I see thoughtful decisions to establish boundaries after a prolonged period of financial dependency by others." He glanced toward Lucas and Patricia. "I also see a pattern of coercion and intrusion into Mrs. Dulcie's privacy. While I understand the stated concern, the evidence suggests that concern was, at least in part, pretextual." Patricia's face went white. Lucas's hand curled into a fist. "My ruling," the judge said, "is to deny the petition for guardianship. Moreover, given the restraining order violations and ongoing harassment, I am extending the protective order for 1 year. Any further attempt to interfere with Mrs. Dulcie's finances or person without court authorization will be considered contempt." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The room rippled and steadied again. Renata squeezed my shoulders. John exhaled a breath so small it might have been a prayer. Lucas stood abruptly. "Your Honor, sit down, Mr. Lucas," the judge said, not unkindly. "This is a ruling, not a debate." The gavel fell, small and final. And then it was over. Outside, the sky had darkened as if the day had shifted seasons while we were inside. The air felt different, charged and cool. John shook my hand and then impulsively hugged me. "You did beautifully," he said. "Go home. Rest. You've won the legal war. Now take care of your heart." Renata and I walked to the parking lot together. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. At my car, she touched my cheek. "Dinner tonight?" she asked. "I'm making stew." My throat tightened. I'd like that very much. On the drive home, I passed the park where I used to take Lucas. Children were swinging high, their legs pumping, their faces lit up like lanterns. A mother pushed a stroller and laughed at something her friend said. The ordinary world continued mercifully ordinary. I felt something inside me unclench. At home, I made tea and sat by the window. The cameras hummed softly, little guardians I had given myself. I thought about calling Bianca, about telling her every detail, about hearing her say "I told you so" in that sisterly way that feels like a blanket and a shove at the same time. I would call her after dinner. I would tell her I was safe. And then I saw it. A small envelope pushed through the mail slot, sliding onto the rug with a whisper. No return address. My heart stuttered, then steadied. I picked it up, peeled it open, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. It was Lucas's handwriting. "Mom," it began, "I'm not going to pretend I didn't want the money. I did. I still do. But today I saw something I haven't seen in a long time. I saw you. I don't know how to be your son without being your debtor. Maybe that's my fault. I'm angry and I'm ashamed. I don't know what to do with either feeling. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to write something that wasn't a demand. I read it twice. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. It wasn't repentance, not yet. But it was different. It was words without an open hand behind them. I placed the letter on the table and stared at it until the edges went soft. I thought of babies learning to walk, how they lurch forward, crash, howl, and still the next day they lurch again. Boundary setting is like that. Loving yourself after a lifetime of bending is like that. It's messy and loud and clumsy, and if you keep trying, it becomes a gate. I poured another cup of tea. I opened the back door to let in the evening air. Somewhere, a neighbor practiced piano a halting waltz that missed as many notes as it found, and still, somehow, sounded like music. Renata's headlights swept across my front walk a little later, and I stepped outside to wave. She brought stew and bread still warm from her oven, laughter tucked into the folds of her apron. We ate at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once counted out dollars for rent that wasn't mine. The same table where I had drawn up my plan for freedom. We ate and didn't talk about the case. We talked about tomatoes that refused to ripen, about a television show that made us both cry, about a recipe her mother used to make when money was thin and love was thick. I slept deeply that night, dreamless and dark, and woke with the kind of quiet inside me that felt like a freshly cleaned room. In the morning, I went into the spare bedroom, the one I used to call Lucas's room long after he'd stopped sleeping. Therein I opened the blinds. Dust motes spun in the light like tiny galaxies. I started cleaning. I took old boxes to the curb. I filled a bag with clothes to donate. I stripped the bed and washed the sheets that held no one's shape anymore. When I finished, the room looked like a blank page. I stood in the doorway and imagined an easel in the corner of the paints I'd set aside returning to my hands. I imagined a bookshelf with my favorite poetry. I imagined a chair by the window where I could sit and read as the sun moved across the floor like a slow dancer. I imagined a small sign on the wall just for me that said, "Special person." My phone buzzed on the counter. It's an unknown number. I let it ring, stopped. Then, a message. "Mom, it's me. I don't expect you to answer. I'll try again when you're ready." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to protect what I had just begun to build, this fragile scaffolding of a new life. Boundaries are like fresh paint. They need time to dry. Touch them too soon and you leave fingerprints everywhere. I brewed coffee and took it outside. The morning air was cool on my skin. The sky the clean blue of a new notebook. For a long time, I sat there and did nothing but breathe. I thought about the judge's gavel, about the sound it made, small and sharp and decisive. I thought about a different sound, older and softer. My own voice finally telling myself the truth. I thought about the next right thing, and then the next, and the next. I didn't know if Lucas would ever learn how to love me without a price tag. I didn't know if Patricia knew how to love anyone that way. I didn't know if the letter in his blocky handwriting meant the start of a bridge or just the last shout across a ravine. I didn't know if I would ever be invited to a future milestone, or if that mattered anymore. What I did know was this: I had a life to live, and it was mine. I had a garden to tend and paint to mix, and friends to feed, and a sister who would laugh with me across a phone line that now carried stories instead of balance sheets. I had an empty room that waited, a house that had been reclaimed, a name that belonged to me. I lifted the mug to my lips and spoke into the steam, as if the steam were listening. "Good morning," I said to myself. "You're special." The wind moved through the leaves as if to agree. The days that followed unfolded differently than any I had lived in years. There was no emergency, no frantic transfer, no late-night call demanding rescue. My life felt like a long, slow exhale. I started with small things: The garden out back had turned wild while I was busy watering other people's lives. I pulled weeds until my knees ached, dirt settling into the half-moons of my nails. It felt good, messy, grounding, real. I bought pots of geraniums from the market, bright red like little bonfires, and lined them along the porch. Every time I stepped outside, they looked like applause. One afternoon, I went to the art supply store downtown. The air smelled of canvas and turpentine, and for the first time in decades, I felt a flutter of possibility. I bought paints, brushes, and a new easel. Not the cheapest, not the most expensive, just mine. The clerk, a young man with paint on his fingers, rang me up and smiled, starting fresh. He asked, "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how easily the word came. Starting fresh. At home, I set up the easel in the spare room. The sunlight from the window pooled across the floor, golden and steady. I squeezed a line of paint onto the palette, held the brush, and waited. The first stroke was clumsy, a jagged smear of blue across white canvas, but it was mine. Stroke by stroke, I painted not for anyone else's eyes, but for my own. Renata visited often. She'd bring soup or bread, or sometimes just her company. We'd sit on the porch in the evening watching the sky change colors. Two women in their 70s talking about everything and nothing. She told me stories of her childhood, of the hardships she had endured. I told her stories of mine, the nights when Roberto and I had counted coins on the kitchen table. Dreaming of better days, the afternoons when Lucas had been my whole universe. One evening, she leaned close and said, "Dulcie, I've seen you grow younger these past weeks. You smile more. You walk straighter. Whatever battle you fought, you're winning." I squeezed her hand. "I'm not sure if I won," I said, "but I'm still standing." The letter from Lucas stayed on my table for days. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. Every word I could think of seemed either too soft or too sharp. Some nights I read it again, my fingers tracing the familiar loops of his handwriting. I remembered him as a boy, writing Mother's Day cards with crooked letters and stickers plastered on the corners. Now the same hand had written a confession of shame and anger, but also something else, maybe a seed. One Sunday, I took the bus to the cemetery. I hadn't told anyone. The path to Roberto's grave was quiet, lined with jacaranda trees, spilling purple flowers onto the grass. I carried a bouquet of white lilies. Kneeling down, I brushed dirt from the headstone and whispered, "It's been too long, love." I told him everything, the secret wedding, the humiliation, the courtroom, the letter. I told him about the paints waiting at home, about Renata's kindness, about the first deep sleep I'd had in years. "You'd be proud of me," I said, my voice shaking. "You always told me I was stronger than I knew. I didn't believe you. But maybe you were right." As I sat there, a breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of earth and flowers. For the first time in a long time, I didn't cry at his grave. I felt accompanied. Not alone. A few days later, another letter arrived. This time the handwriting was shakier, the ink smudged in places. "Mom," it read, "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about dignity, about love not being for sale. Patricia doesn't agree with me writing to you. She says I'm betraying her, but I can't stop thinking about you. I miss you. Not the money. If you ever want to talk, even for 5 minutes, call me." Lucas, I sat with that letter for a long time. My heart was torn in two directions. One part wanted to tear it up, to protect the fragile peace I had built. The other part, the mother part, wanted to believe him, wanted to cradle that small crack of honesty and widen it. That evening, Renata came over. I showed her the letter. She read it carefully, then placed it back on the table. "What does your heart say?" "My heart says yes," I whispered. "But my scars say, be careful." She nodded. "Then maybe don't answer with your heart or your scars. Answer with your wisdom. You've earned it." The next morning, I dialed his number. My hand trembled. When he answered, his voice was tight, like he hadn't slept. "Mom, Yes, Lucas, it's me. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Then he exhaled. I didn't think you'd call. I almost didn't. I said honestly, I needed to be sure I wasn't calling for the wrong reasons. I understand. His voice cracked. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. You start, I said softly, by not asking me for anything? I'm not, I promise. He paused. I need you to know that I regret it. All of it. The wedding. The way we treated you, I let Patricia decide too much. I thought providing her with comfort was more important than honoring you. And I was wrong. Tears burned behind my eyes. Lucas, I don't know if we can go back. Too much has been broken. Not asking to go back, he said quickly. I'm asking for a chance to go forward differently. We spoke for 15 minutes. It wasn't perfect. There were still lies tangled with truths, still hesitation in his voice. But there was also a tenderness I hadn't heard in years. When we hung up, I sat quietly with my tea, wondering if forgiveness could be rebuilt the way a garden could, patch by patch. Patient hands pulling weeds, waiting for new growth. That night, I painted until my hands were stiff. The canvas filled with colors I couldn't name, swirling blues and fierce reds, quiet greens softening the edges. When I stepped back, I saw something unexpected. A figure of a woman standing in a doorway, sunlight spilling around her. She looked old and tired and luminous all at once. She looked like me. Weeks passed. Lucas called once a week, never asking for money, only sharing small pieces of his life. The job he was trying to keep, the arguments with Patricia, the memories of childhood that still lived in him. I didn't trust it fully, but I didn't reject it either. Sometimes that's what survival looks like. Neither blind hope nor bitter refusal, but cautious presence. I began walking in the park again. Children laughed, dogs barked, life bustled around me. I met a small group of women my age who gathered every Thursday morning to walk together. They invited me, and I said yes. Soon Thursdays became a ritual, laughter echoing on the trails, stories traded like treasures. They began calling me the strong one, and I laughed at the irony. Strength had been forced on me, but now it felt like a gift. Renata often joined me. We joked about starting a club, mothers who learned too late but survived anyway. Sometimes at night I still felt the ache of betrayal. I would wake at 3 a.m., remembering the words only special people, and it would cut like glass. But then I would walk to the spare room, switch on the lamp, and look at the painting of the woman in the doorway. And I would remind myself, I am special, even if it took 70 years to say it aloud. One morning, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a small wooden frame, hand-carved, holding a photograph of me and Lucas when he was 5. We were at the beach, both of us laughing, his arms looped around my neck. The photo had been enlarged, cleaned, restored. A note was tucked inside. I found this in an old box. I wanted you to have it where you can see it. Lucas, I cried then, not with rage, not with sorrow, but with something softer. Maybe he was trying. Maybe I could too. The framed photograph sat on my dresser for days before I could bring myself to look at it without breaking. Each time I passed, the little boy's smile reached out to me like a memory made flesh. And I felt the ache of everything that had been lost, but also the tender pulse of what still remained. I placed it by the window in the spare room next to the easel. It seemed to belong there, among the paints and the growing collection of canvases that bore my clumsy but honest strokes. When the morning sun spilled into the room, the boy's face glowed as though he were watching me begin again. Patricia never called. Not once. The silence from her was a gift in itself. But through neighbors' whispers and casual mentions in town, I heard enough to know that her resentment had curdled. She had begun telling people I was unstable, that I had turned against them without reason. That she and Lucas had been forced into debt because of my selfishness. I didn't correct those stories. Let her paint me as the villain. People who matter will see through paint-thinner lies. Lucas's calls, though, continued. Always careful, always brief. Sometimes he told me about work, how hard it was to make ends meet. Sometimes he asked about my health, my garden, my painting. He never asked for money. That in itself was a miracle. One night, he surprised me. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "I know Patricia. She doesn't want me to talk to you, but I can't stop. I've been thinking about when I was a boy, how you worked so hard, how you'd come home exhausted and still read me stories. I don't know how I forgot that. I don't know how I let her convince me that you owed us anything more." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. They weren't redemption, not yet. But they were cracks in the wall he had built between us. "Lucas," I whispered, "memory is the beginning of love. Don't forget again." After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the night fold over the neighborhood. For the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like poison. It felt like possibility. Weeks later, Renata invited me to join her church group on a day trip to the mountains. My first instinct was to say no. For years, I had chained myself to routines of sacrifice, saying no to joy as though it were indulgence. But something inside me stirred. Why not? We drove out early, the bus filled with chatter and laughter. The mountains rose around us, green and endless, and I felt as though the world was reminding me how small my sorrow really was. We picnicked near a stream, women passing sandwiches and stories as if both were equally nourishing. I breathed air that smelled of pine and water and earth, and I thought, this too is life. This too belongs to me. That night, back at home, I unpacked my bag and saw a text on my phone. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakably hers. "You've poisoned Lucas against me. You'll regret it. Do you think you've won? But I'll make sure he chooses between us." My hands shook, but not from fear, from anger. Anger that she still believed love was a battlefield, that she still thought Lucas was something to be won like a prize. I didn't reply. Silence was my armor now. Instead, I called Bianca. My sister laughed when I told her about the mountains, about how I had joined a picnic like a schoolgirl. "I told you," she said warmly. "Once you close one door, you find a dozen windows." "Bianca," I said softly, "Lucas is trying. He's remembering. Do you think people can really change?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Not for money, Dulcie, but for love. Sometimes, yes. Not always, but sometimes." The next morning, I went to the cemetery again. This time I brought not just flowers, but one of my paintings. It was rough, uneven, a sunset smeared with too much orange, a crooked horizon line, but it was mine. Propped it against Roberto's headstone. "Look," I said aloud, "I'm still learning, but I'm trying. Just like Lucas." The wind lifted, gentle and warm. For a moment, I let myself believe Roberto was nodding. As summer stretched on, I began doing things I hadn't dared in years. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I joined the Thursday walkers for coffee afterward, lingering in laughter until the sun dipped low. I baked cakes and brought slices to Renata, who scolded me for ruining her diet but ate them anyway. And slowly I began to feel like a person again. Not an ATM. Not a victim. A person. One evening, as I painted in the spare room, the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened. Old reflex. Through the camera, I saw Lucas standing there alone. No Patricia in sight. He looked thinner, older, his shoulders heavy. For a long moment, I hesitated. Then I opened the door. "Hi, Mom." His voice was small. "Lucas," I said carefully, "why are you here?" He held up a bag. "I brought dinner. I cooked." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Lucas, who had once called me to complain about boiling pasta, holding a casserole dish like an offering. "Come in," I said. We ate at the kitchen table. The food was simple. Chicken, rice, beans, but it tasted like an apology. Lucas didn't look at me much, but when he did, his eyes were wet. He said finally. "I don't know how to make this right. Patricia thinks I'm weak for even being here. Maybe I am, but I miss you. Not your money, you. The words cracked something inside me. I set down my fork, folded my hands, and looked at him. Really looked at him. Lucas, love isn't a debt. You don't owe me, and I don't owe you. But if you want a relationship, it has to be built on truth. No more lies, no more using me. He nodded, his face crumpling. I don't want to lose you. You already lost me once, I said gently. Don't do it again. We talked for hours. Not about money, not about debts, but about memories, about Roberto, about the little house where Lucas grew up, about the time he had broken his arm climbing a tree and I had carried him 2 blocks to the hospital, my heart pounding harder than his pain. We remembered together, and in remembering, something fragile began to mend. When he left that night, I hugged him at the door. He smelled of soap and exhaustion. Good night, my son, I whispered, and for the first time in years, it felt true. After he was gone, I stood by the window, looking at the framed photograph on my dresser. The boy in the picture grinned at me, arms around my neck, eyes full of trust. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe, just maybe, the man wasn't so far from the boy. The night Lucas brought dinner, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness is slow, like honey dripping from a spoon. But it was a beginning, and beginnings are precious when you've lived so many endings. In the days that followed, I felt a lightness that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with choice. I walked every morning, painted every afternoon, cooked for myself without guilt, and sometimes even sang in the kitchen like I used to when Roberto was alive. But I also knew better than to think storms vanish after one ray of sunlight. It was late one Friday when the storm arrived again. A knock at the door. Not Lucas this time, but Patricia. My heart dropped at the sight of her on the camera. Perfectly dressed, hair flawless, lipstick red enough to bleed. She stood straight, a soldier at war. I opened the door only a crack. Dulcie, she said, voice honeyed but hard at the edges. We need to talk. No, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. You've poisoned Lucas. He doesn't even listen to me anymore. He's ashamed. Do you think that's good for him? Do you think making a man hate his wife will heal what you broke? I didn't break it, I said. You did. With lies, with greed, with exclusion. I don't make Lucas hate you. Make him remember himself. She stepped closer. He belongs with me, not with you. I steadied my breath. He belongs with himself. That's all. I'm not competing with you, Patricia. I never was. But I won't be erased anymore. Her mask cracked for a second. Fury flashed across her face. You'll regret this, she spat. He'll choose me. Then let him, I said softly. I'll survive. And I closed the door. I leaned against it, trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. Patricia's war wasn't mine to fight. She could scream at the sea. The tide would still come and go without her. Days passed. Lucas kept calling, softer each time, more his own man and less her echo. Sometimes he asked about my garden. Sometimes he just wanted to hear my voice. One evening he admitted, Mom, she doesn't understand. She thinks money is love. I thought so too. But when you stopped, I realized how empty that kind of love is. I listened. I didn't say much. Sometimes silence is the best lesson. By autumn, the leaves in the park turned gold and crimson. Okay, I painted them endlessly on canvas, in my mind across the quiet of my house. Okay, I painted change because change had become my language. One afternoon, Renata and I sat outside sipping coffee while children chased each other on the sidewalk. She looked at me and said, Do you realize how far you've come? I smiled. I'm 70 years old and finally learning to live. She raised her cup in salute. 2 second chances. That evening, Lucas came again. It's time alone. No bag of food, no excuses. He looked tired but lighter, as though carrying less armor. We sat in the living room. The framed photograph of us at the beach hung on the wall now, where I could see it every day. "Mom," he said quietly, "Patricia gave me an ultimatum. She said if I keep coming here, she's leaving." I swallowed. "And what did you say?" He looked at his hands. "I told her she could go if she wanted, because I can't lose you again." Tears welled in my eyes. "Lucas, I don't want you to choose between us. But I won't lie hearing you say that. It heals something." He leaned forward. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I want to try to earn it." I placed my hand over his. "Forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. And I'm not ready yet, but I'm ready to try." We sat like that, mother and son, silence filling in the gaps where money once lived. For the first time in years, I felt we were truly speaking the same language. In the weeks that followed, Patricia disappeared from our story. Rumors said she moved back in with her parents, that she cursed my name in every room she entered. Maybe she did, but her absence was my gift. Lucas began rebuilding his life brick by brick: work, independence, humility. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he nearly fell. But at least now, when he reached out to me, it wasn't for money. It was for something far rarer: love. And as for me, I traveled. Nothing extravagant, just a bus trip with Renata and the Thursday Walkers to the seaside town where Roberto and I once dreamed of retiring. We walked along the beach, and I let the waves wash over my ankles. I laughed like a girl, salty wind tangling my hair. I thought of the pink dress still hanging in my closet, the one I had bought for the wedding that never included me, and I promised myself one day I would wear it, even if only to dance in my kitchen. I painted. My canvases grew bolder, brighter. The crooked lines no longer embarrassed me. They felt honest, like scars that told their story without shame. One of the women from the walking group asked if she could buy one. I laughed, shaking my head. "These are not for sale. They're mine." And at night, when the house was quiet and the cameras blinked their steady light, I lay in bed and whispered gratitude to Roberto, to Renata, to Bianca, even to the pain that had forced me to awaken. I wasn't the same woman who had once believed her worth was measured in rent checks and groceries delivered to someone else's fridge. I was someone new. Or maybe I was finally the person I had always been, buried under years of giving without receiving. The last letter I received from Lucas came months later. It was simple. "Mom, I know I hurt you. I can't erase that. But thank you for teaching me the hardest lesson of my life, that love is free and money is not. I hope one day you'll forgive me fully. Until then, I'll keep trying to be the son you deserve." I folded the letter and placed it inside the frame with our beach photo, tucking the two together. Past and present, pain and hope, mother and son. And now, here I am, 70 years old, finally telling my story, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a woman who lived, who stumbled, who gave too much, and who finally learned to give herself everything she had denied. If you've listened to me this far, maybe you see a part of your own life in mine. Maybe you too have confused love with sacrifice. Maybe you've given until you disappeared. If so, I beg you, don't wait 70 years to remember you are special. Do it now. Live now. And if my story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel less alone, then I ask you only this: subscribe to this channel, like this story, and share it. Because none of us are as alone as we think. And sometimes, the right words at the right time can remind us that we too are special people.